Last Wish and King's Fall are arguably Destiny's most important raids in the entire franchise. Whether you love them or you hate them, there's no denying their impact on the game and the absolutely incredible job well done by the raid teams that designed them. Both King's Fall and Last Wish are true MMO raid experiences, all within a first-person perspective, and that feat alone is worth praising. Personally, I love both these raids. I believe they're not only the most important, but the best in the franchise. And when I say the best, I don't necessarily mean most replayable or anything, but simply the most well designed. Each of these raids are excellently crafted by the art teams and the raid design teams, but today I wanted to ask the question which one of the two is better. Now, I not only wanted to ask this because I think breaking them down could be a pretty fun challenge, but I also wanted to hear your thoughts in the comments below and your reasoning behind why one is better than the other. We're going to be breaking these raids down by category: atmosphere, bosses, loot, and story and impact, and give a score to each category from 1 through 10. I'm going to try and be somewhat objective with my reasoning and ranking, but of course there will be some subjective opinions of my own that you may not agree with. Again, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. First, starting with atmosphere. King's Fall takes place on Oryx's massive dreadnought, a hive-infested, dark and dreary nightmare. The raid begins inside the Hall of Souls, near the Court of Oryx, where you'll need to ignite 6 statues to open an ascendant portal. In the Hall of Souls, the tone is set for the raid with horror-esque ambient sounds that pretty quickly let you know that this place isn't inviting. After moving through the portal, we're shown the true scale of Oryx's throne world, and it's massive. While the beginning shows off its open-ended size, the few encounters that follow evoke a sense of claustrophobia and dire need to push through. The Annihilator totems gave off that perfect fantasy locked door vibe, only to be broken and dispelled by stringing together magic. In this case, Deathsinger's power. The War Priest who stands guard another portal high above your team. Golgoroth, whose dome area is so small that it's almost a surprise the mighty ogre even fits inside it. And of course, Oryx's final boss room, so opened up and beautiful, showing off the amazing skybox of Saturn. From beginning to end, King's Fall's atmosphere is nothing but haunting, perfectly encapsulating the Hive's aesthetic and the Hive lore, with rituals and spells, dark caverns, and disgusting mutations. King's Fall tells an incredible story about who the Hive are with just its visuals and sound design, which is why in the atmosphere category, I believe King's Fall deserves a 10 out of 10 rating. Last Wish takes place on another absolutely gorgeous location crafted by Bungie's art team. The Dreaming City is, and I quote from a Bungie employee, is like if the Vault of Glass and the Dreadnought had a baby, left it on the doorstep of Peter Jackson, and he raised it on his own. And honestly, that's a pretty killer description of the Dreaming City. Without a doubt, it's the prettiest location in Destiny 2, and its beauty extends to the Last Wish raid. Although similar to the Dreadnought in some regards, the Dreaming City isn't presented as a place to be feared, but rather explored. The Last Wish raid begs for each and every nook and cranny to be searched for secrets and cool locations. It's not a threatening place until the Taken Corruption shows itself. The dark, shadowy nature that the Taken Corruption exudes is perfect and provides that mysterious feeling of, why is something so dark and evil inside something so pristine? Throughout the raid, you make your way through so many different areas that appear to be handcrafted by some of the most magnificent magic-wielding architects, and your job is to cleanse it from the Taken's mark. The real standout area is the Riven encounter, which feels like an abandoned palace infested by a giant monster. The atmosphere is unmatched in Destiny 2 and easily earns a 10 out of 10 rating for the Last Wish as well. Now on to bosses. Bosses are undeniably the majority's favorite part of a raid. We crave the chance to slay them with our high DPS weaponry, and both Last Wish and King's Fall have 4 boss fights, so it'll be really great to compare them. Starting with King's Fall bosses, they were both great and not so great. The War Priest is one of my favorite bosses in the King's Fall raid, and at the time had unique mechanics that were very impressive. The brand mechanic designated one player to space out his ad killing to ensure maximum DPS, and everyone else would need to stay close to the brand holder to damage the boss. And at the end of the DPS phase, you would need to hide behind one of 3 rune pillars to survive the wipe mechanic. In retrospect, this mechanic is fairly simple, but at the time was crazy for a first boss of a raid. It holds up as a well-designed fight, if not just a little bit easy after time. The War Priest's lore and boss design nets him bonus points as well. It's said in the lore that the War Priest had conquered 585 worlds and mastered slaughter and victory, appeasing the gluttonous worm god inside of Oryx. The second boss of King's Fall, Golgoroth, is easily one of the most well-designed fights in Destiny's history. Of course, if done as intended. 2 Guardians will be in charge of passing Golgoroth's gaze around the whole arena, while the other 4 drop damage pools from the ceiling and rotate as the gaze shifts. Down near the DPS pit, Cursed Thrall will be running rampant and can be extremely deadly, so the DPS team will need to be on top of clearing them as soon as possible. The fight, if learned and executed properly, is almost like Swan Lake in its fluidity and mastery, and it's definitely the toughest fight in the whole raid. Day 1 of this guy, my team and I thought we would never beat this fight, but eventually we got it, and all I can say is I felt more relief in that moment than when we finally beat Oryx. It's a shame his fight can be cheesed a bit now with the one orb strategy, because Golgoroth's fight is incredible if done legitimately. The Daughters encounter in the final room is basically a phase 1 Oryx fight because a lot of the mechanics transfer over, but as a standalone fight, the Daughters are pretty easy. I'm not saying my team and I beat it first try or anything, but I'd say it's the easiest fight in the entire raid. The only challenge could be the randomness of the fight that chose a member of your team to be the relic runner. Some people just can't platform, and that's going to be the toughest part of this fight. But the mechanics themselves are pretty straightforward. Hopping on plates in a counterclockwise manner builds up platforms to a spark that the relic user uses to drop the Daughter of Oryx's shield. The shield stolen can then be used to protect you while you DPS the Daughter safely. You'll need to do this to both of the Daughters, but after a little bit of effort, this fight is just a cakewalk. It doesn't really hold up as anything but an introductory encounter to the Oryx fight. Now the Oryx fight. The first thing I'll say is, there is nothing like beating Oryx for the first time. One of the hardest fought battles, especially at the time, Oryx's fight requires perfect execution of its mechanics with very little room for error. It takes the mechanics from the Daughters fight and adds to them with a whole lot more to worry about. Like a small throne room that teleports you in to kill a Shadow of Oryx mini-boss every DPS cycle, an Ogre to kill for each of the 4 platforms to leave behind blighted bombs, Knights who will need to be killed so they don't devour the blighted bombs, building platforms for the Relic Runner to grab the shield from the vessel, and of course, stunning Oryx's chest with your weapons and detonating the blights to deal the damage. Again, your execution needs to be perfect in this fight, and if you really think about all the moving parts, the Oryx fight does have a lot going on. Killing the Taken King was definitely a feat early on before Reddit guides and perfect strategies were formed. Oryx was a threat that everybody knew about. He was hinted at, teased, and tied to so many other villains in the game, and then had an entire expansion with his namesake. Oryx was the big baddie of our solar system, and sending Oryx back to the darkest corner of the deep, watching his crystallized body float away towards Saturn, is not only one of the best moments in Destiny, but I'd argue it's one of the best moments in gaming. In summary, King's Fall bosses are as follows. The War Priest is an 8, Golgoroth is a 10, the Daughters are a 5, and Oryx an 8. Oryx would be higher, but his fight is so strictly mechanics based and not enough fighting Oryx himself. It's a minigame fight, but the spectacle of killing the Taken King, Oryx himself, is still what makes him an 8. Last Wish's boss fights are incredibly well done, but some were forgettable. The first boss from Last Wish, Callie, shares some similarities with the War Priest fight. Clearing ads followed by a major knight, then DPS until a white mechanic that's blockable by hiding, and rinse and repeat. Its similarity to the War Priest was the first thing I noticed when running this encounter, and my team and I got the hang of the fight fairly quickly for that reason. Callie, while overall a solid encounter, is almost completely forgettable because it doesn't really stand out in its design, both mechanically and artistically. The second boss, Shiro-Chi, however, is an outstanding encounter that is impossible to forget. You cover so much ground in this fight, and the mechanics are excellent. It combines burst DPS cycles with fast ad clearing, puzzle solving, and even minor jumping puzzles. The various locations you travel through are incredibly well designed aesthetically, and the pacing of this fight is perfect. When you're at the final DPS burst cycle, it can be pretty intense because if you fail, then it's back to the very beginning. Shiro-Chi is a great blend of mechanics and slang, leaving it to be a purely fun fight. Morgeth is the third boss, and most people don't even quite understand this guy's mechanics to this day. And it's because his mechanics are rarely used to the fullest. People usually treat this fight as basically a one phase or wipe, and don't really bother with trying to two phase and learn the rest of the mechanics. Despite this, Morgeth can be a pretty fun fight at the very least, just not particularly memorable or challenging. He does look freaking badass though. And finally, Riven. Riven of 1,000 Voices is something else, man. If done legitimately, Riven is easily the most complex, tedious, and challenging boss fights ever designed for a Destiny raid, but also one of the most fun bosses to run. The mechanics would take far too long to go over, but the sheer amount of focus and execution of these mechanics is unmatched and absolutely blow me away even now. Whoever designed this encounter deserves raises because Riven is absolutely crazy. From reading symbols and juggling Riven back and forth between rooms, to calling out the eyes, the final stand, and even carrying Riven's heart after going through this massive fight, Riven is truly an epic masterpiece. And it's a shame again that there is a cheese to beating it because it deserves to be played legitimately. Riven's boss design is also something to note because she's menacing and disgusting as hell. Not what I expected when we heard of Riven, but I was not disappointed when we finally saw her. Only 12 people beat Riven in the first 24 hours, whereas 37,000 people beat Oryx, and if that isn't a testament to its prestigious and difficult nature, I don't know what is. In summary, Last Wish bosses are as follows. Kali is a 6, Shirochi easily a 10, Morgeth 6, and Riven 10. Moving on to the loot, Kingsfall is looking a little bit sad in this department. Almost every single weapon is laughable besides the sniper rifle and the machine gun, and I don't care if somehow you guys like the Zauli's Bane or the Anguish of Dristan, you're wrong. They're garbage weapons. The sniper is a great PvP option, and the machine gun was really just awesome for the auto-loading holster at the time, and its look and sound were pretty cool as well. Touch of Malice, the raid exotic, doesn't have much use outside of the last 2 encounters of the raid, which makes it a little bit disappointing for a raid exotic. The armor, however, looked pretty good, but that's just a personal opinion, of course. The Hunter looks the best to me, but I do like the Titan and Warlock sets as well. Of course, with the Age of Triumph, these sets got a massive improvement artistically, and I'd argue the Hunter set might be the best looking set in the game. Loot overall though, with those junky weapons, is gonna have to be a 5 out of 10. Last Wish had much better loot than Kingsfall, with most of the weapons at least being usable and some being top tier like the Nations of Beast and the Supremacy. I even really liked the Chattering Bone quite a bit. Of course, 1,000 Voices, the raid exotic, is freaking awesome even if it isn't the DPS king or anything. It's unique and badass, and that's all I can really ask for. The armor sets are also pretty damn sexy as well, one of the only good looking armor sets in Destiny 2. Loot gets an 8 out of 10 for Last Wish. And finally, story and impact. Oryx was the peak Destiny villain. The Taken King story and how it tied into the overarching plot was incredible for the Destiny universe. With the entire expansion focusing on Oryx and his revenge, and being the father of Crota, Oryx was easy to recognize as the big baddie. You didn't have to be a lore nut to know this guy was a monster hell-bent on revenge and taking your solar system. Everyone wanted to kill Oryx, and when we did, it created a power vacuum for the Hive and Taken Power, giving us need to slay the Prince Malak and Alakul, and anyone else who would try and rise to power. The Taken War culminating into one massive raid on the Taken King himself was the best told story in the game's history so far, and easily scores this a 10 out of 10 for the story and the impact. Last Wish's story is a bit more hidden in the lore, but still one of the better raid storylines Bungie has created. While Riven and the implications to the Awoken storyline and the Universal Destiny storyline are pretty big, the in-game story gave little reason to care about Riven, but it did make you care a lot about saving the Dreaming City. While Riven was a bit out of nowhere unless you're a lore nerd, the story and the impact thereafter was still pretty massive. The raid completion set in motion a Taken Corruption curse cycle to be enacted in the Dreaming City as per Riven's Last Wish. It's definitely the next best storyline for a raid, but not near as epic as a villain like Oryx. 9 out of 10. Now on paper, based on somewhat objective, somewhat subjective rankings, Last Wish just barely beats out Kingsfall. But if I were to factor in pure subjective reasonings, Kingsfall would win, no question for me. The story, the atmosphere, the champions killed leading up to Oryx is no doubt my preferred experience, but after breaking it down and combing through everything, it's hard to deny that Last Wish is deserving of the title of best raid of the two. I will say though, that Shirochi and Kali being bosses that you don't actually kill is kinda weird. You basically shoot the crap out of them and try to blast them with supers and they just survive it all, and essentially all you've done is perform an exorcism on them to rid them of the Taken. Again, kind of weird and not as cool to me as killing Oryx's champions like the War Priest and Golgoroth. But that's it for my pretty subjective, trying to be objective ranking of the two raids. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on these raids down below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I will see you all next time.